Ready? I think as all of you know, yesterday the Department of General Services issued a new policy regarding use of the Legislative Plaza and the Capitol grounds. Yesterday afternoon, officials with the Department of General Services made a lawyer who represents protesters aware of the new policy. Also, the protesters themselves were made aware of the policy mid-afternoon yesterday. And then the Department of General Services also posted, I believe, 18 signs down in the plaza area summarizing the new policy. So the protesters were very aware as of mid-afternoon yesterday that there was a new policy in effect that in effect established a curfew on the plaza from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It is our job to enforce that policy, and that's what we did last night. Approximately 75 troopers arrived at the plaza around 3 a.m. for the purpose of enforcing that policy. At that time, the policy was once again told to the protesters. I believe the entire policy was read at that time, and the protesters were given an opportunity to leave at that point. Approximately 25 protesters did leave at that time. 29 protesters made the choice, made the decision not to leave, with the understanding that they were in clear violation of the new policy, which basically puts reasonable restrictions on use of the plaza. They made the choice to stay. Those 29 protesters have been charged with criminal trespass. It's a Class C misdemeanor, $50 fine if they're found guilty. And again, it was our response to simply enforcing the policy that the Department of General Services had issued. Let me make two more quick points, and then I'll turn it over to Colonel Trott to make any comments he wants to make. Number one, we respect and support the right to peacefully protest. We are simply urging those who want to engage in peaceful protests to adhere to the reasonable policies that have been issued by the Department of General Services. If they choose not to, then it's our responsibility to take the appropriate enforcement action, and we will do so. Last thing is I want to commend our state troopers. I think last night they were really a model of how this kind of situation should be handled. I think you all know it was a pretty sensitive situation. A lot of people were watching, and I think the state troopers did a great job in handling the situation. In fact, I saw one protester interviewed by some station who acknowledged that the state troopers had done a very good job in how they handled it. With that, what I'd like to do is hand it over to Colonel Trott of the Highway Patrol to make any comments he wants to make, and then we'll be glad to take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Of course, I won't repeat what Commissioner Gibbons had to say about the operation. I do want to commend the troopers who performed at the Capitol last night. They all acted with incredible restraint, professionalism, and did a great job. This is just part of our duties to secure the Capitol area and the grounds of the Legislative Plaza. General Services creates the policies by which we are guided, and we simply enforce those policies. Other than that, we'll be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Commissioner,
Yes, sir.
Can you answer who made the decision about removing the protesters at 3 a.m.?
I did. I guess you're asking about the time.
Yeah.
And there were two reasons for that. Number one, we wanted to give all the protesters adequate time to adhere to the policy. And again, they were aware of the policy as of around mid-afternoon yesterday. We wanted to make sure they had adequate time to pack up their belongings and leave. Many did, but some chose to stay. Second, we wanted to choose a time that was of minimal disruption to the public at large. And we felt that doing it in the early morning hours would be the most appropriate time to avoid that disruption.
So you had a sheriff's spokeswoman yesterday after the policy was released who said it would be unreasonable and unfair to do what you did. because you didn't give them enough time. She said you were going to give them until today to apply for a permit. Was she
That is correct.
misinformed, or did
She was
mislead
correct.
us
No,
deliberately?
no, I think you are misconstruing what she said. She said that they would not have to have a permit yesterday, that they would have to have a permit today. She was not referring to enforcement of the curfew last night. And again, the protesters clearly understood that the curfew was in effect.
Why didn't you announce if you don't leave, you're out? And it wasn't clear from
I'm sorry?
the statements made by the administration where policies are going tomorrow, it was unclear, there was confusion. Why not come out and say, if you're not, why not announce it 3 hours, 6 hours beforehand? If you're not gone by 3, you're out. Why 10 minutes?
Well, they knew 12 to 14 hours beforehand
Well, they clearly
that
did.
that the curfew was in effect. They understood that.
Also, the night judge seemed to disagree with you.
The judicial magistrate is obviously entitled to his opinion. His opinion was that 12 to 14 hours was not adequate notice. I think it was adequate notice. We have a disagreement, which is fine. We ended up issuing misdemeanor citations, and from a practical standpoint, it doesn't matter whether it was a warrant or a citation. If the judicial commissioner had signed warrants, they would have been booked into the jail and then, I'm sure, released immediately based on their own recognizance. So the effect was the same.
Why were they held
But,
so long?
you know, that was his call.
Why were they
and I
held so
respect
long
it.
after the judge told you to release them?
I'm
Why
sorry?
were they held so long after the judge advised you to release them?
Frankly, it just took a little while to do the paperwork on 29 individuals and to do all the paperwork on 29 citations.
You guys had 75
Colonel Trott may
troopers,
wanna-
you'd think that wouldn't take very
Colonel
long.
Trott may want to elaborate on it. I was not over there at that time.
One of the problems was the judicial commissioner chose to take a 1-hour lunch break while we were attempting to get the warrants signed, and left us there waiting for his decision whether he would sign the warrants or not. That was part of the delay.
Commissioner and Colonel, obviously this is international news. Pictures are all over the place now. A simple why. I mean, I know that it's in violation of the policy, but what led to the policy from General Services?
Well, really, that's something you need to ask General Services. I mean, I'm aware generally of the reason, and that was public safety and health conditions on the plaza. And I am aware of the fact that representatives of the protesters themselves approached the state earlier this week asking for some assistance to address the problem that they were facing. They were concerned about public safety. They were concerned about health conditions. And frankly, I don't want to speak for the Department of General Services, but I think their policy was in part designed to address the needs and safety of the protesters themselves.
I mean, this has been going on about...
And the policy that is put in place, I think, is a very reasonable policy that will allow the protesters to continue to peacefully assemble under the right circumstances. And I think what the Department of General Services was trying to do is strike a balance between making sure they had their right to peacefully protest, but at the same time address the concerns they had, as well as others, over public safety and health
They
conditions.
clearly weren't being asked to be evacuated and evicted. They were asking for help and you didn't provide it, or else there wouldn't have been an issue.
Well, I think, they probably don't see it this way, but I think we are. I think we have set up a situation where they can peacefully protest under safe circumstances.
But the safety department could have controlled the area more instead of evicting them.
And we are not in a position, we don't have the resources to go out and, in effect, babysit protesters 24/7.
How much did last night's operation cost?
We don't have that.
What'd you pay for overtime and other things of operation?
Colonel Trott can address this, but I don't think at any time did the protesters offer to pay overtime or anything like that, and we were not in a position to be providing 24/7 protection at the level that would have been necessary in order to address their concerns.
What role did you have in
So-
designing the policy, sir?
Really, none.
They said they were meeting with you before they released the policy. The
Yes,
General Services.
yes, we did have a meeting in terms of our ability to enforce the policy. And we indicated to them that if they issued a policy, that we would enforce it. I don't know, do you have any other comments on overtime?
Yeah, as you know, Tennessee is in the middle of a budget crisis like other states. The Department of Safety and the Tennessee Highway Patrol specifically does not have overtime built into our budget. Now, that's not to say that we don't occasionally have to pay overtime, but usually what we do is have troopers burn the time if they accumulate over their 160-hour schedule. So there was no set amount of overtime paid for the operation last night.
Do you all expect to enforce the policy each night?
It's our job to enforce the policy, and we're prepared to do that.
Commissioner, if you follow the letter of the policy,
Yeah.
it says the plaza is closed to the public at 10 o'clock. Does that mean people who attend an event at TPAC can't walk across?
Well,
the
there's
plaza?
also, somewhere in here, Rick, there's some.
Without specific authorization?
Right, without specific authorization. So,
Does that mean
you know,
an
I
individual?
cannot speak for the Department of General Services on that, but obviously, I think they're gonna take an approach where there is an event where they wanna make an exception to that and authorize people to be there till 10:30 or 11, you know. I'm sure the Department of General Services.
Well, what about
will
just
work
walking
with
across
us
the
on that.
plaza, just because you happen to want to?
Well, yeah, you know, that's a very good question, and we're gonna take a reasonable approach on that. Was the person knowingly and intentionally violating the curfew, or was that person just unaware of it? And
So
that's
are
a
you guys
case-by-case situation that we'll have to look at.
So
So
it's
you
gonna be
guys gonna have
selectively
people
enforced.
out, every extra people out every night to make sure nobody violates this new curfew?
I don't want to get into the details of what we plan to do, but it's our job to enforce the new policy, and we intend to do everything we can with the resources that we have to enforce the policy.
Commissioner, can you clarify whether or not there was the requirement for the permit was on the books until yesterday? Or I was told yesterday that it was always there, that it
Yeah,
was more sort of
and
lax
again, that's really a
enforcement.
question you need to ask General Services. It is my understanding that General Services has had in effect a permit policy. And frankly, up until now, it was pretty much willing to go along with a peaceful protest. But I think everyone in this room understands, I think, that within the last week to 10 days, the dynamics of the protest changed. And we began to see a number of incidents, many incidents in which the original protesters were being victimized. And once those dynamics changed, I think the Department of General Services felt that it needed to take appropriate action, and it did.
Can you be specific about what are those dynamics? I mean,
Well, what I read in the press, you know.
they were acted on, I mean, I guess.
The Department of General Services took a look at it, at all the information that it had in terms of public safety and health conditions, and came up with a reasonable policy that allows the protesters to continue to peacefully assemble, but at the same time tries to address those public safety and health concerns.
Because in the last, I mean, we're kind of dancing around this. All this week, we've heard reports of public urination, people having sex on the plaza.
Right.
I mean,
And I've heard and seen those reports in the press, but I'm sure the Department of General Services took a look at all that. As I pointed out a few minutes ago, the Department of General Services also met with representatives of the protesters themselves, who were very concerned about a number of things that were going on at the plaza.
The public urination and indecency happens all around the state, with the state being enforcing curfews in other areas other than just the Capitol complex for misdemeanors such as those.
Well, what the Department of General Services is concerned about is state property.
But you're the safety department,
And,
you have a purview over the whole state to some
Well,
extent.
it is our responsibility to provide security at the Capitol complex. That is very specific. It's in state law that we are responsible for security for the Capitol complex. And so when the Department of General Services issues a policy, it's our intention to enforce the policy.
Do you have any response to the protesters who say it's not exactly free speech if they have to pay for it or do it within a certain time frame?
Well, there's a balance there, and, you know, there have been a lot of court cases on that. Basically, I don't think it's it's a very limited intrusion into their ability to protest. Various court cases have upheld curfews, permit systems, and I think that the Department of General Services policy falls well within the proper guidelines.
Commissioner, when the protest happened in the spring in the legislature, you charged the protesters in the committee room, and those charges were later dismissed, or they were acquitted. In this instance, you charged the protesters and the judge, the night court judge refused to bring them up. You feel you're being perhaps a bit heavy-handed in your approach to your response to these
No,
actions?
no, not at all. I mean, I respect the fact that a judicial officer is going to have the final decision. I mean, I was district attorney for 16 years, so I
But
understand.
are you overcharging these protesters?
Absolutely not. They've been charged with a Class C misdemeanor, which is the lowest possible charge
And
they
yet you
could
couldn't
face.
beat that standard?
And they were not, no one was charged with disorderly conduct. No one was charged with resisting arrest. They were charged with trespass. And again, I think that it's obvious that they knowingly and intentionally violated the policy. They were very aware that they were trespassing. I don't see how they could possibly deny that. The judicial commissioner, I respect his decision that he felt maybe they needed some longer period of time, and you know, that's his decision. But it's our decision, our feeling that they had adequate notice, somewhere between 12 and 14 hours. They were very aware that they were trespassing, and that the proper charge was brought against them.
Was that the original charge that was brought before the commissioner?
Correct.
Was it trespassing?
Correct.
Well, why not just issue a citation to begin with? Why go for the full arrest? You have that discretion, don't you?
Well, yes, but basically a citation is usually issued when the action in question would not be ongoing if you issued that citation. In this case, if we simply issued the citation, the violation would simply continue. So it was important to remove them from that location. Otherwise, you just have a continuing violation.
There seems to be some confusion on where the bus was, when they were released. Can you say when that happened, where the bus was?
The bus was parked in the Sally Port of Metro Booking. They were not detained on the bus. Once the judicial commissioner refused to sign the warrants, they were released out into the Sally Port area where they stood waiting for our troopers to complete the paperwork. They were not handcuffed at that time.
They weren't detained, but could they have walked away at that
No,
point?
they couldn't have walked away.
So if they weren't detained and they couldn't walk away, how does that?
They were detained.
Oh, they were?
Detained in the Sally Port
Okay.
until we completed our citations.
Commissioner, did you get a go-ahead from the governor before conducting the operation?
I'm sorry.
Did you get a go-ahead from the governor? Did you speak with the governor
We
before?
did, the governor's office was briefed on this. And,
Governor himself?
His staff members briefed him on the situation.
And he okayed it? He agreed with it?
I'm sorry. what
He
was it?
okayed it? He said go ahead, he gave you the green light? Did he have that option?
Well, our meeting was with various members of the governor's staff who did approve the action that we were taking. That is correct.
What did you learn from the other cities, the way they handled it and the way?
Well, it's kind of interesting that you say that, and Colonel Trott can get into this a little bit. We were very aware of how Oakland handled it, which didn't appear to be a very good way. We were also aware of how Atlanta had handled it, and I believe, and Colonel Trott can get into this, that we really kind of used Atlanta as kind of an example of how it ought to be handled. But Colonel, do you want to add anything?
You know, our goal was to be a very calm and professional police department or law enforcement agency during our operation last night. We didn't have any goal or reason to believe that we would encounter any violence, and we didn't want to antagonize any violence. We simply wanted to enforce the policy set forth by General Services and do that in the least intrusive and the least violent way we could.
If there's no more questions, we have a list of the names of the people arrested and their ages. We'll pass that out.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.